Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. We love getting into the nitty-gritty of science, and today we're going to be cracking open a biology textbook to unravel the mysteries of chromosomes and inheritance.
Yeah, we're going way beyond those Punnett squares you might remember from high school. This is about understanding the actual mechanisms that make you you.
Okay, so I think we all kind of get that we inherit traits from our parents, like my dad's curly hair or my mom's uh, love of gardening. But how does that stuff actually get passed down?
Well, it's like an intricate dance happening inside our cells, and chromosomes are leading the way.
Chromosomes, those tiny X-shaped things we see in pictures, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it all starts with the chromosome theory of inheritance.
Mhm.
This theory basically says that genes aren't just floating around randomly. They have specific addresses on those chromosomes, like little houses on a street.
So it's organized, not just a jumbled mess.
Exactly, organized. And the way these chromosomes behave during cell division, like when cells make copies of themselves, that helps explain those classic inheritance patterns that Gregor Mendel figured out.
Oh, yeah. Mendel and his pea plants. He's like the godfather of genetics, right?
Totally. But there's another big name in this story, Thomas Hunt Morgan. He really took things to the next level.
You know how in those superhero origin stories, there's always that one experiment that changes everything?
I'm sensing a good story coming.
Well, in the world of genetics, that story involves fruit flies. And Morgan, he was a total game changer.
Morgan was brilliant. He chose fruit flies for his experiments, and it was a stroke of genius. I mean, these tiny creatures are easy to breed, they have tons of offspring, and their lifespan is short. Plus, their chromosomes are big and easy to see under a microscope, perfect for studying inheritance.
So what exactly did he find with these little flies?
He was studying eye color in fruit flies. Most
Ah,
fruit flies have red eyes. It's the wild type, the most common version. But Morgan found a mutant male fly with white eyes. Talk about standing out from the crowd.
like finding a shiny Pokemon.
Exactly. And by breeding these flies, he noticed something really interesting. The white eye trait only showed up in males. That led him to conclude that the gene for eye color was on the X chromosome, one of those sex chromosomes that determine whether you're male or female.
Ah, so that's where sex-linked genes come in. I remember learning about that stuff like color blindness being more common in males. It all boils down to those X's and Y's.
Precisely. Males only have one X chromosome, so if they inherit a recessive gene on that X, they'll express the trait. Females have two X chromosomes, so they need two copies of the recessive gene to show the trait. That's why they can be carriers without actually having the condition themselves.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got genes lined up on these chromosomes like beads on a carefully arranged necklace, but what happens if someone comes along and shakes things up a bit, shuffles those beads around?
That's where linked genes and recombination come into play, Morgan. Mr. Fruit Fly genetics. He found that some genes tend to be inherited together, like they're linked because they're physically close to each other on the same chromosome.
So it's like those beads on the necklace sticking together, kind of like best friends.
Exactly. And to figure this out, he did this really cool experiment. He was looking at body color and wing size in flies. The typical fruit fly is gray with normal wings, but Morgan also had flies with black bodies and tiny undeveloped wings called vestigial wings.
Sounds fashionable.
Right. So when he bred these flies, most of the offspring had either both wild-type traits, gray body, normal wings, or both mutant traits, black body, vestigial wings. Those genes were close together on the same chromosome, so they were basically inherited as a package deal.
Makes sense. But I'm guessing it wasn't always that simple, was it?
You're right. He noticed that some offspring had new combinations, like gray bodies with vestigial wings or black bodies with normal wings. These were the recombinants, the rule breakers, the ones that mix things up.
So it's like those beads on the necklace actually did get shuffled around somehow.
Exactly. And that shuffling happens through a process called crossing over during meiosis, which is the special type of cell division that creates sperm and egg cells homologous chromosomes, which are basically pairs of chromosomes that line up next to each other and swap segments of DNA, like trading beads on that necklace.
So the farther apart two genes are on a chromosome, the more likely they are to get separated during this crossing over thing,
Yeah.
right? It's like those beads at the ends of the necklace are more likely to get swapped.
Precisely. And, Morgan being the genius that he was, he used this to develop something called linkage maps.
Linkage maps, what are those?
Think of them like roadmaps for chromosomes. They show the order of genes on a chromosome and the relative distances between them based on how often they get separated during crossing over the farther apart. Two genes are, the higher the recombination frequency, meaning they're more likely to be split up. It's like genetic detective work mapping out the chromosome.
Okay, so we've got these genes on chromosomes. They can be linked. They can even swap places during crossing over. It's like a constant game of genetic musical chairs. But what happens when those chairs get messed up? Like when they're too many or not enough?
That's a great question, and that's where things can go really wrong. We'll get into that next time.
All right, everyone, cliffhanger. We'll be back soon to dive into those chromosomal errors. Stay tuned.
So remember how we were talking about those chromosomes getting mixed up sometimes? Well, things can go wrong even earlier during cell division, like when those chromosomes don't separate properly.
Yeah, I think I remember that being called non-disjunction, right?
Right, non-disjunction. And that can lead to some pretty big consequences for the cell because it ends up with an abnormal number of chromosomes, a condition called aneuploidy.
Aneuploidy. So it's not just about the order of genes on a chromosome, but how many copies of each chromosome a cell has.
Exactly. And one of the most well-known examples of this is Down syndrome, which is usually caused by having an extra copy of chromosome 21.
Down syndrome, right?
Yeah.
So having just one extra chromosome can have a huge impact on development.
Absolutely. And there are many other examples of aneuploidy too. Some involve the sex chromosomes, like Klinefelter syndrome in males, where there's an extra X chromosome.
So instead of the typical XY, they have XXY.
Right. And then there's Turner syndrome in females, where there's only one X chromosome instead of two.
Wow. So these chromosomal abnormalities can really affect a lot of things, from physical characteristics to cognitive abilities.
They can, and it highlights just how delicate that chromosomal balance is. We were talking about genes getting shuffled around during crossing over, but sometimes even bigger changes can happen to the structure of those chromosomes.
Like what kind of changes?
Well, there are deletions where a segment of a chromosome is lost, or duplications where a segment is repeated in versions where a segment gets flipped within the chromosome, and translocations where a segment moves from one chromosome to another.
Whoa, that's a lot of ways for things to get rearranged.
Yeah.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It can be, and these structural changes can also lead to a variety of genetic disorders. For example, Cri-du-Chat syndrome is caused by a deletion in chromosome 5.
Cri-du-Chat. That sounds kind of cute. What does it mean?
It means cry of the cat in French, and sadly it's named that way because babies with this syndrome have a distinctive cry that sounds like a cat's meow.
Oh, that's sad. And it's all because of a missing piece of a chromosome.
It is. They also have a variety of other developmental delays and health problems, and another example is chronic myelogenous leukemia, or CML. It's a type of cancer that's often associated with the translocation between chromosomes 9 and 22.
So a piece of chromosome 9 basically swaps places with a piece of chromosome 22.
Yeah, and this creates a fusion gene that leads to uncontrolled cell growth.
So it's not just about the genes themselves, but where they are and how they're arranged on the chromosomes.
It's all connected. We've been talking about these genes and chromosomes, but we haven't even touched upon another fascinating aspect of inheritance, and that is that sometimes it actually matters which parent a gene comes from.
Wait, what do you mean, like whether I got a gene from my mom or my dad could make a difference?
It can for some genes, and it's called genomic imprinting for these genes. It's not just about the gene itself, but whether it came from mom or dad.
So it's like some genes have a memory of their parental origin.
In a way, yes. It seems that certain genes are marked or imprinted during the formation of sperm and egg cells, and this imprint determines whether the maternal or paternal copy of the gene is expressed in the offspring.
That's wild. So even though an individual inherits 2 copies of the gene, only one is actually active.
Exactly, and the other copy is silenced, and we're still trying to fully understand why this happens. But one idea is that it has to do with methylation, a process where methyl groups are added to DNA.
Methylation, huh? So it's like adding a little tag to the DNA that says, don't read this gene.
You got it. And this methylation can either turn genes on or off depending on where those tags are added.
That's so cool. But why would it matter which parent's gene is expressed? I mean, shouldn't they both work the same way?
That's a great question, and scientists are still trying to figure out all the reasons. But one theory is that it's a sort of genetic tug-of-war between the maternal and paternal genes, each vying for control of development.
A genetic tug-of-war. I love that. So mom's genes are pulling one way and dad's genes are pulling the other, and who wins determines how certain traits develop.
It's a fascinating idea, and it highlights how, even with all the amazing things we've discovered about genetics, there's still so much more to learn. And, all this talk about genes and chromosomes and imprinting, it reminds me that we haven't even touched upon another whole category of inheritance that happens outside of the nucleus.
Wait, there are genes outside the nucleus? You're blowing my mind.
There are, and it involves those powerhouses of the cell, the mitochondria.
Oh, yeah. The mitochondria, they have their own DNA, right?
They do. It's separate from the DNA in the nucleus, and these mitochondrial genes are passed down in a completely different way. They're inherited maternally, meaning they come from the mother.
So the mitochondria I have in my cells came from my mom, not my dad.
Exactly. That's because the egg cell contributes most of the cytoplasm to the zygote, the fertilized egg. And that cytoplasm includes the mitochondria. The sperm cell mostly just contributes its nucleus.
It's like a separate lineage of genetic information passed down to the maternal line. That's incredible.
It is, and because these mitochondrial genes are so important for energy production, mutations in these genes can lead to a variety of mitochondrial disorders.
Mitochondrial disorders, so problems with the mitochondria can actually cause diseases.
Unfortunately, yes, these disorders can affect energy production in cells and lead to a whole range of symptoms depending on which tissues are affected.
But it's not just about the genes in the nucleus. Those extranuclear genes play a vital role too.
hmm
Wow, we've covered so much ground today, from genes on chromosomes to genes outside the nucleus and everything in between.
It's amazing to think about all the different ways genetic information can be passed down and how these mechanisms shape who we are.
It really is, and it makes me appreciate just how complex and interconnected everything is in the world of genetics.
It is complex, but it's also incredibly elegant. There are these fundamental principles that tie everything together, and ultimately, this understanding of inheritance helps us understand the diversity of life on Earth.
Okay, I'm ready for the big picture. What does all this mean for our understanding of inheritance and how it shapes who we are?
Let's tie it all together in our final segment.
All right, so we've been on this incredible journey through the world of chromosomes and inheritance, from those neatly arranged genes to those rule-breaking imprinted genes, and even those genes that hang out outside the nucleus. It's like we've uncovered this hidden language of life.
It is like a language, isn't it? A code that determines everything from our eye color to our susceptibility to certain diseases. And the more we learn about this code, the more we realize just how complex and fascinating it is.
And it's not just about understanding our own individual traits, right? This knowledge has implications for everything from medicine to agriculture to conservation.
Absolutely. For example, understanding inheritance patterns is crucial for developing new treatments for genetic disorders, and it's helping us breed crops that are more resistant to disease or drought. And even in conservation efforts, this knowledge can help us protect endangered species by understanding their genetic diversity.
So it's like this tiny world of chromosomes and genes has a huge impact on the world around us.
It really does. And, all this talk about inheritance reminds me of one crucial process that we haven't talked about much yet, meiosis.
Oh yeah, meiosis, that's the special type of cell division that creates those sperm and egg cells, the gametes, that are responsible for passing on genetic information to the next generation.
Exactly. And meiosis is like a master conductor orchestrating this intricate dance of chromosomes and genes, making sure everything is in order and ready for the big show.
So it's not just about copying the DNA like regular cell division, it's about shuffling and dealing out those genetic cards to create unique combinations.
Precisely during meiosis, those homologous chromosomes, the pairs of chromosomes you inherit from your parents, they line up next to each other and swap segments of DNA like trading cards with a friend.
And that's crossing over, right? That process we were talking about earlier where genes can get shuffled around.
Exactly, crossing over. And then those chromosomes get separated and distributed randomly into the gametes, so each sperm and egg cell ends up with a unique combination of chromosomes and genes.
It's like the ultimate genetic lottery. Every sperm and egg cell is a one-of-a-kind creation.
And that's what makes each of us unique. The incredible diversity of life on Earth is a testament to the power of meiosis and all those processes that shuffle and rearrange genetic information.
So it's not just about passing down traits from parents to offspring. It's about creating new variations that allow populations to adapt and evolve over time.
Exactly. Meiosis is like a constant source of new possibilities, ensuring that life can continue to thrive in a constantly changing world.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about how all of this is happening inside our bodies all the time, these microscopic processes that are shaping who we are and driving the evolution of life on Earth.
It really is. And, we've covered so much ground today, from the basic principles of inheritance to those mind-boggling exceptions. But I think the key takeaway is that inheritance is far more complex and nuanced than we might initially think.
It's not just about dominant and recessive genes. It's about chromosomes and meiosis and imprinting and extranuclear inheritance. It's about all these intricate processes working together to create something truly remarkable.
And it's about understanding that our unique traits are a product of this intricate interplay, a legacy passed down through generations, connecting us to the vast web of life.
Beautifully said. I think we've successfully navigated this fascinating world of chromosomes and inheritance, but I know there's always more to learn and explore in the ever-evolving field of genetics.
There is, and we encourage all our listeners to keep those questions coming, keep diving deeper into the world around you, and never stop being curious.
Well said. Until next time, stay curious, everyone.